So Stranger Things somehow manages to bring a 37 years old song back into the spotlight. Running Up That Hill was actually supposed to be named A Deal with God, and it's currently top 4 on Billboard. Kate Bush then suddenly makes an estimate of $2 million or more in streaming, and it's amazing. I had to remake it. There are some really cool sounds, very interesting vibe, and I'm about to show you how to produce that song from scratch. Here's a preview.
Be running up that road, be running up that hill, be running up that building. Say if only could.
Now we're gonna shorten it to about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so we're gonna end the song right before the rhythm guitar joins the arrangement. Because, well, because of this. Guess who did it? Yep. Anyway, meet your singer for today's video, and what's different here is that it's a male voice. Now the lyrics, as Kate Bush herself explained on a certain interview, are all about a man and a woman swapping places. So Kate, in this version, I granted your wish and swapped you for a man. This man.
Hi there, I'm Pablo Montilla from Uruguay. As a child, I always sang before, but took a long hiatus, and after COVID, I started recording again. So here I am.
And where can people find you if they want you to sing their songs?
Please check out my YouTube channel. It is in youtube.com/PMLUY.
Alright, let's get this tutorial started. First of all, Kate Bush actually used the Fairlight CMI, which is a synthesizer, sampler, and DAW. That must have been so much fun back in the day. So if you want to create these sounds and get them as close as possible to the original, you can look for Fairlight CMI samples on the internet, or use the VST version by Arturia. I think it's the Cello 2 sample, which she probably processed with reverbs and other effects. Sounds like this. However, I did not use that sample. I wanted to synthesize every sound using the stock synth that comes with Ableton Live so everyone can follow along. This works for pretty much any synth, okay? Let's start with the lead synth, which is probably what draws attention to this song the most. I used Wavetable, Ableton Live stock synthesizer, and I'm only using one oscillator. It's something between a saw wave and a square wave, with a bit of pulse width modulation, 30%, and the amp envelope looks like this. About 12 milliseconds attack, 600 milliseconds decay, minus 6 dB sustain, and almost 500 milliseconds release. The cutoff frequency is 650 Hz to darken it with a bit of resonance. There's some unison effect. The mode is noise, which creates a noisy texture and makes the sound fuller. 8 voices at 20% effect. But what's really cool about this synth is the glide effect, which is used to create this pitch slide at the beginning of every note. Now, that's nothing new. Every synth nowadays has this feature, but Kate Bush did that in the 80s with a lot less technology. I think that's pretty creative and amazing, actually. In the effect chain, the synth runs through an equalizer, a compressor, a utility effect to narrow the stereo width, and 2 different tape delays. I'm using Valhalla delay, and the most important one to achieve that characteristic sound is the second at 208 milliseconds, which is like a dotted 16th note at this song's BPM. Now, I have 2 tracks just for this lead sound. Some notes are played by the first track, and some notes are played by the second track. And I did this because some notes sound darker. So on the second track, even though it's the same synthesizer settings and pretty much the same effects, the equalization is a bit different. The cutoff frequency is above 1 kHz, and I got rid of the second delay. Then these 2 tracks go through a reverb, Valhalla Vintage Verb, on a plate preset that resembles the reverbs from the 80s, and it's just perfect for this. Hey, subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this video. Next, there's this background pad that plays from the beginning and seems to hold the same notes for most of the song's duration. Super simple synthesis. It's a saw wave on 2 different oscillators. The second oscillator is a bit detuned, Unison mode again is noise, 4 voices at 50% effect, makes it super blurry and spacious. The amp envelope has 500 milliseconds attack, so it fades in smoothly. LFO1 modulates the pitch very slightly, creating sort of a slow vibrato effect. And the filters bend past this pad. They're pretty steep, 24 dB per octave, keeping it only in the mid-range, from 120 Hz to 940 Hz, with some resonance on both low-pass and high-pass filter. Now this extreme equalizer tilts the spectrum towards the high frequency side to further shape the sound, make it more breathy. Then there's this auto pen device being used as a tremolo effect on a very slow rate to create movement, because this pad holds the same notes for a long time, so there's a high risk of becoming boring. And the last in the chain is this Valhalla vintage verb with a very long decay time, almost 10 seconds, so the whole thing becomes this lush soundscape. Then there's the chords. This synth plays the main harmony, and when you hear it against the pad, there's always a lot of dissonance. The notes played by the pad are not the same as the chords, most times. And I feel like this is what makes the feelings of this song feel more complex. This adds a lot of depth and takes those ideas in the lyrics to another dimension. Everything sounds much deeper when you layer with the dissonant background harmony, right? And the settings for this instrument are also pretty simple. Similar to the lead synth, there's this one oscillator with the wave that's between a saw and a square wave, but this time there's no pulse width modulation. The amp envelope is basically just a 2.3 seconds decay. The filter is a low pass at 265 Hz, but we're using the envelopes to modulate the cutoff frequency and pitch. Envelope 2 controls the cutoff frequency, so because of the 8 milliseconds attack, there's a quick rise in the cutoff frequency. Each note starts darker and quickly gets brighter, almost like a wah sound. Envelope 3 controls the pitch, so because of the 24 milliseconds attack, the notes start on a low pitch and quickly rise 1 octave, creating this pitch slide effect that's almost like the glide from the lead synthesizer. This is just a different way to achieve that effect, and I thought it would be nice to show you guys both techniques, so even if you're a beginner, you can finish this video with a bunch of new skills. Next in the chain, the chords go through the usual reverb and an equalizer to help position this sound in the low mid-range. I added some voice samples as a layer, just reinforcing some notes during the intro section, but it doesn't really play a big part in this arrangement. It sounds like this. Then there's the bass, which was very hard to distinguish. You only hear this if you had good speakers or headphones. And what's really fascinating here is that the bass is just pedaling on a C note throughout the whole song. It doesn't change notes according to the chords being played by the other instruments. To me, it keeps the entire song in a tension state. It never lets us breathe. There's never full resolution. Actually, to be more precise, the bass seems to play a few A-sharp notes every now and then, but they're so brief you could almost disregard them. For the synth settings, I could get away with using just a sine wave. That's how deep this bass sounds, but I wanted to have at least some presence. I wanted to keep a little bit of that string plucking sound that a real bass guitar has. So I went with a saw wave with a very low cutoff frequency of 79 Hz, which is being modulated by envelope 2, so it starts on a higher frequency, then it quickly decays, and that's what creates that bass string plucking sound. Then I sidechain it to the kick for clarity purposes to keep the sub-frequencies from clashing. Before we move on to the drums, I noticed there's some sort of noise layer in the original instrumental, so I used the Vocoder device to add a layer of noise whenever any note is played. This affects all the instruments you've seen so far. Alright, time to look at the drums, and Kate actually used the LinnDrum. It's a fantastic drum machine that all the cool people were using in the 80s and are still using to this day. And it happens to be made by the same guy that made the LinnStrument, my favorite MIDI controller ever. So I took the kick and the snare from the LinnDrum, ran the snare through some reverbs to thicken it and make it last longer. Then I used some toms and percussion samples to recreate that groove with the help of an 8-note ping-pong delay on the toms. During the chorus, the original song has this layer of cymbals or noise or some high frequency content that I can't distinguish, It sounds like distorted open hats maybe. So I added some open hat samples and a crash hit on the first downbeat of the chorus. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the original song, the chorus happens very suddenly. There's no anticipation. It's like, surprise, chorus! So I took the liberty of adding a reverse crash sample just to let you know the chorus is coming. And that's the instrumental. Now let's quickly look at the vocal chain. I had great vocal tracks to work with, so basically I added compression to keep the volume steady, a de-esser, an equalizer to boost the airy frequencies, a vocal doubler to widen it a bit since everything in this song is so wide in the stereo field. This is important to make sure the vocals don't sound small in comparison if they were just fully mono.
Be running up that road, be running up that hill, be running up that building.
Then I'm using this awesome plugin DSEQ3 as a multi-band compressor. It has many uses besides that, and I definitely recommend it for everyone to check out. Next in the chain, delays and reverbs by Valhalla. Super necessary for recreating that 80s vibe. They really loved reverb in the 80s. And these utility devices in the end of the chain are just doing volume automation. For the back vocals, I got several tracks, different recordings, each one panned to a different position in the stereo field, like we're surrounded by back vocals.
Is there so much hate for the ones we love?
The chain includes the usual effects, but the equalization is different to separate them from the main vocals and avoid muddiness in the 200 to 500 Hz area. In the back vocals for this section, they have a huge boost at 10 kHz to sound breathy like the original song. By the way, the reverb on the back vocals is way louder than on the main vocals to help push them to the back of the mix. On the master chain, I'm using Ozone 9 to add vintage tape distortion, widen the stereo image of the high mids and high frequencies, and push the loudness with the maximizer module. Alright, before you listen to the final product, make sure you've subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. If you learned something today and you want to keep learning pop music production, sound design, mixing, and all things related. Here we go.